Hi, I'm PGodin. I'm an instructor with ICT. My background is structured cabling and electronics. And the videos we're going to produce today have to do with fiber optics. All right, today we're doing a demo on a fiber optic connector from 3M. This is an older style of connector called a 3M hot melt. It's an SC connector. The reason we do these is they're relatively inexpensive, and we get a chance to actually practice doing polishing, doing inspections, and dealing with epoxy-based connections. So we're going to start with this. The 3M hot melt comes in the kit format, so we buy the kit. The kit includes all the tools that we actually need to put the connector on. What I have in my hand here is the fiber optic cable that we're actually going to be using. This is a zip cord, so it's used commonly for assemblies. This is if you can read that, this is an older piece of cable here, but it's from Corning. And this is a multi-mode fiber, and the information is located on the cable here. So what I'm going to do is, for simplicity, we're going to take this is a dual zip cord. We're going to take that and create what's called a simplex, which is just a single one. So I've already ripped them apart, and I've tied a knot in this end. And the reason for that is because some of the insides are quite slippery, and if we strip without doing that, we're actually going to rip all the insides out on these short assemblies. So you wouldn't obviously normally do that unless you were concerned about pulling out the insides. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and prep this fiber. And before I do that, you need to wear safety gear, so make sure you have your glasses on. You should have no food or drink, obviously, in this area as well. And what I'm doing right now is I've got just some black electrical tape. I have to first create a disposal area for fiber optics. So what I've done is I'm going to take the tape and I'm going to put the sticky side up over here, so that if I break any fiber, and it's very likely I will, I can actually dispose of it safely here. We got to be careful not to allow any stray strands or shards outside of our work area here. You don't want to get stuck on your clothes. You certainly don't want it stuck into you. So this is the first step you should always do. Now I'm going to go ahead and prep this fiber, and I'm going to talk about the different layers inside this fiber as I do it. There's several different styles of strippers. These ones here are what we have in the lab, and these are quite excellent actually, because they allow us to strip the outer jacket as well as the fiber itself. There are other styles of strippers we've used over the years. These ones here called no-nicks are used to strip just the fiber, and this one as well. These are millers. So there are different styles of fiber optic strippers, but we do prefer these ones here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start prepping this. But as I do so, I'm going to go ahead first and open up this connector, because I got to start putting this into an oven. This is a hot melt connector. Now 3M are known for epoxies, and they got into the business because they realized that the best way to attach fiber to a connector is by using epoxy. So they came out with this line of product. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. It is a hot melt, which means the connector is actually preloaded with epoxy. So I do have to actually heat up the epoxy that's already in here in order to soften it enough to insert the fiber. So these are the parts that it comes with. This piece here is to simulate a 3mm jacket, and we don't need that. So we can go ahead and dispose of that because we do have the 3mm jacket. What we're left then with is the boot. This is a strain relief boot. It's going to help ensure that we don't bend the fiber too hard on the end. And I also have a crimp ring, which we're going to put on just a little bit later. We have the locking mechanism, which we're going to put on at the very, very last step. I'm going to put that aside for now. And then we have the actual connector body itself. It already has a dust cap. We need to save that dust cap for later on as well. So I'm going to move that over. And what you see here is the actual connector itself. So the connector alone has a bit of epoxy sticking out the end there. I don't know if you can see that or not. But there's epoxy, and we're going to actually stick that right into a holder right here. So this is the holder that comes in the kit, and I'm going to insert that right here like this. And what you can't quite see off camera is the oven. So let me just show you what it looks like. I've already plugged it in to get it warmed up. So this is the 3M oven. It gets very, very hot, and I'm going to go ahead and insert that there. I have about 2 or 3 minutes for that epoxy to soften. So that should be hopefully just enough time for me to prep this fiber. So I'm going to go ahead and prep the fiber now. When you're prepping fiber, you always want to be very, very careful. And one thing you need to do is you need to pull everything quite straight when you're doing the stripping. So you're going to see me doing it fairly straight. So here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to strip about this much length right now. And you notice that I'm actually only using this tool to cut. I'm not using it to pull this off because what you see here is very, very silky. But this is actually Kevlar, and it'll actually dull your tools. So we never want to use this tool to pull off the jacketing, otherwise you will start dulling this tool. So what I've done is I've just taken off this jacket, and I need to actually follow kind of a protocol for lengths, and I have that indicated right on the sheet here, and we'll put a link to the instruction set here so you can see the stripping lengths here. So the first one, if you can't quite read that, it's approximately 8 millimeters as for the Kevlar right here, and then I also need to strip down the tight buffer here to about 14 to 16 millimeters. And then I have a few extra millimeters here of length on the fiber. This is not quite as critical on the end here because we're going to be, as you're going to see, we're actually going to scribe that off. So I need to cut this down to 8 millimeters right now. So I have a little ruler here, and we actually measure that out to 8 millimeters. So you can use scissors on Kevlar. Do not use a knife, and don't use your side cutters. If you use your side cutters, if they're your favorite pair, they won't be your favorite pair for much longer. So this is approximately 8 millimeters, so I'm just going to confirm that. So yeah, we're right about 8 millimeters right there. So I've got that prepared, and the next step is to actually take this ferrule. This is a two-step crimp. I know it's kind of hard to see there. Let me show you here with a lighter background. So it's a two-step crimp. And it has a very small end on one end and a larger end on the other. So I'm going to insert the crimp ring here like this with the large end outward. It's going to be towards the connector. So I'm going to insert that right now, and now I'll go ahead and start stripping. Now this part here, I may in fact break this during this video, and I might have to actually start again. It's quite common to actually break the fiber. What we're actually doing is we're taking off 2 layers out of 4, and there's 4 layers here right now. So you see the blue, which is this is the tight buffer. Right below it is the coating that's attached to the fiber itself, and then of course we have the fiber, the glass itself of the fiber, which is the core and the cladding. So we're going to take these off, and this isn't like stripping wire. We're not going to take the whole thing off all at once. We're just going to take off little bits at a time. And I need to take it off and bring it down to 14 to 16 millimeters. So if you can see that, I am using the inside-most part of the tool here to strip away 2 layers at once. So I'm stripping away core and cladding. What I'm going to do is let me just strip off just I'm stripping off to leave the core and cladding, pardon me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off just the buffer here, and I want to show you the difference between taking off the core, or sorry, leaving the core and cladding only, and leaving on the buffer over here, and then leaving on the coating right here. So if you can see the 3 different layers here. So buffer here, you can just barely see it here, but there's the coating. This is 250 micron in width. And there's the glass alone, the core and the cladding, and that's 125 microns in width. The most common mistake that people make when they first do these connectors is they don't strip off this coating layer. And if you don't, obviously this is not going to fit into your connector. The connector is 125 micron is what it's designed for. That coating is 250, so far too large. And if you don't strip that off correctly, you are going to get frustrated because the fiber will not go through the connector. So I'm going to just verify the length here. So I should be at 14 to 16 millimeters. I prefer to go a little bit on the short side, so I'm at 14 right now. So we're just going to leave that right there like that. Now my connector, hopefully, is ready. So it's been preheating in the oven. Before I go ahead and do that, I'm just going to give this a quick little wipe. So I have a Kim wipe here. This is tissues designed for lenses, and I have isopropyl alcohol. This is the high test stuff. This is 99% ISO. I'm going to go ahead and just put that on here. Now you can pull fairly strongly on the fiber itself. Oh, I forgot to strip off this little bit here. So there we go. Just take the rest of that coating off there. So you can actually pull fairly strongly on the fiber. It won't break. In fact, you probably want to pull kind of hard just to make sure it doesn't break. But this is glass, and it is very, very sensitive at this point. If you put any little scratches in it, it'll definitely break. All right, I don't have much time here. So there's the connector. This is hot. And I'm going to go ahead and insert this fiber right in here. And you have to do it fairly slowly but steady because you don't want to waste too much time. And you're going to insert this all the way until it actually stops like that. So I want to keep it in place. I'm just going to push the cable in here. And I have a cooling tray. Again, it's off camera. This is what it looks like. There's a cooling tray, and even give you some handy scale up here. But I'm going to go ahead and insert that on the cooling tray, and I'm going to let it cool for a little while. So while I do that, let me explain to you a couple of other things here. So I also have a crimp tool that we're actually going to be using here a little bit later. This comes in the kit. We also have a scope that comes in the kit. This isn't the one that comes in this particular kit. We have it's a less expensive scope, but we are going to need to inspect the end face, and we're going to give you that kind of in a separate file here. We'll show you what the end face actually should look like and what it could look like if you make some mistakes. So you do need to have some sort of scope. We do have, again, the kit comes with one, but usually it's not one that's of this high a quality. And of course you want to download instructions. We also have here is a visual fault locator. So this visual fault locator allows us to actually put a fairly bright light on the fiber, and we can actually identify where faults might be. So this is a very, very handy tool to have as well. So I have that set aside here. We can see if we can have time to try that a little bit later. So let me see if this connector is cool enough now. And it seems to be. It's staying in here. So I'm going to go ahead and extract it from its holder here carefully, because I do have fiber sticking out the end right here. So I don't know if you can see that, but we have a little bit of fiber sticking out the end right there. So what I'm going to have to do now is I actually have to do a little cleave on that. Now, when you're cleaving on a connector, it's actually called scribing. So, and what I have here is a scribe. So the scribe itself has a very, very sharp little tip. And what we're going to do, and this is one of the most sensitive operations here, is I'm actually going to put a little scratch in that glass, and then hopefully the glass will break. I want to pull it away straight. If I put too much pressure and it breaks sideways, typically the glass will shatter at an angle inside here, and it won't give us a proper end face. So this is perhaps the most tricky part of all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do that. So this can only be done visually. You can't really feel it. So I think I've done it. So I'm going to grab the fiber and pull straight. So there it is. So I've broken it. So I've disposed the fiber over here. And I'm going to go ahead and start polishing that. Now, before you start polishing, and what you see here is actually my polishing paper and my pad. This is just a rubber pad here. So this is called lapping film. And as lapping film, here we go. This lapping film is actually fairly small grit. Some different manufacturers, if they're producing a connector that needs polishing, will produce different grit. For 3M, they just stick with this 2-micron grit. I also need a polishing puck. Which we'll get hold of in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an air polish. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that there's not too many sharp edges, because as I start polishing, I don't want that fiber to catch. So if you can hear that, that's the glass against this lapping film. So, and I'm just spinning it all the way around. I want to take away all the sharp corners off that tiny little piece of glass sticking out. Okay, so if you do a quick visual here, you can see that there's actually, you can't quite see the fiber But you can see that there's a bit of epoxy on there. I still have a little bit of length of fiber that I need to take away. So let me just keep trying it just a little bit more here. And I'm going to go ahead now and apply the puck. So I have the puck right here. This is designed to hold the connector straight at a good 90 degrees. And what you're going to watch me do is I'm actually going to do a polish, and I have to do a figure 8. Ideally, the center of the fiber, which is where the light is being carried, the core, is you want the core to stick out the most out of the connector. So if I were to just go back and forth, I would create kind of a wedge shape somewhere on there, and I wouldn't be guaranteed that the core would be the furthest point out. But by going in a figure 8, I keep changing the leading edge, and it's going to ensure that the core is the part that sticks out the most. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now I start, and you have to start with very, very, very light pressure. And you can see that I've got my finger both on the jig here, the polishing jig, and on the connector body itself. So I'm going to go ahead and start very slowly. I don't know if you can hear that. And I can go ahead and speed that up, and I can start applying a little bit more pressure at a time. I'm taking away the glass and the epoxy at the same time. And as you're polishing it, it'll suddenly get really soft, really easy. And if you do a quick inspection, I'm just going to put a little bit of ISO on this tissue here and give it a bit of a wipe. You should be able to see nice, shiny, white surface here. So let's see if I can demonstrate that here on the camera or not. I'm not sure if I can do that. Not quite a focus. But in any event, it should be nice and polished. So what I like to do with my students is I go a little bit out of sequence. What I do is I actually have them, after the polish, is to have them visually inspect it right at this point here. The reason for that is if they did have a breakage in the fiber and the core is imperfect, they can actually put it back in the holder and put it back in the oven, and they can take it out and push a little bit more fiber out, and they can repolish it again. So we can actually rescue this connector if you're being really cheap about it, which, of course, we have to be cautious. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert that like that, and then put that in there, and then push it through. But I'm going to go ahead and do a quick inspection here. And I can see that my fiber is not quite perfect, but it's going to be good enough. I've got a tiny little crack on the edge of the core. So I'm just going to give it a couple more polishes here. And now I'm ready to actually finish off the connector. So here you can see that I've got Kevlar, and the Kevlar here should be trapped between the crimp ring and the connector body. So I'm going to put it in like that, make sure as much Kevlar can get in there. Here's the crimp tool. The crimp tool has four different sizes, this one. We're going to be using the 137, the .137 and the .190. Again, I don't know if you can see that on the camera there, but there they are. So I'm going to go ahead and crimp those two areas. Now this is a compression crimp, so you'll find that as you crimp, the connector sometimes stays kind of trapped a little bit in the crimper, and that's normal for compression. So, like that. So don't worry about that, just go ahead and kind of wiggle it out, that's normal, okay? And there we go, so I've crimped that on, so now I've got great strain relief, and that's really important to get good strain relief. So when you're pulling on the connector, you're not putting pressure on the glass, you're putting pressure on the Kevlar. So now I'll go ahead and push this boot up. The boot has a little flat spot, and it might be, again, hard to see on the camera here, but there's a little flat spot right there. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on. That flat spot's got to line up with that flat spot on the connector right there. So you can see the connector has kind of a flat, one area that's flat. So I'm going to go ahead and push that on. I'm going to slide the locking mechanism in place, and it is keyed. So I'll get it keyed like that. And sometimes you have to do a little adjustment on the boot. And there we go. And it's free floating. And then, of course, the very end would be to put a dust cap back on. So that's how you would do an assembly. So normally, if you kind of get used to it, you can probably do several of these in a span of half an hour. You can probably do a cable assembly with 4 ends quite easily. So it takes an experienced person probably less than 5 minutes per connector. So the next step would be, of course, to connectorize the other side. And while we've got it here, why don't we give this visual fault locator a try. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that in here. and you can see the light at the other end right there. So we do have a good connection right there. And if we were to see in the dark, we would see a little bit of light leaking out of that knot. You can see that. There's a little bit of light leaking out of that knot because you are going to lose some light through there. So there we go. So that's how we do a 3M fiber assembly.